Thanks everyone. I think Ronnie has just well and truly reminded us of the value of living life, a life lived according to your values. So an op shop. Anyone here want to, share with us that they buy their clothes from op shops, or anyone enjoy op shop shopping? I love it, and I particularly want to go to this one in Melbourne. It just looks fantastic. But the ubiquitous op shop is probably the first example of social enterprise in Australia. You take something that nobody wants, you, through a business, turn it into money that you can then use for service delivery. So I guess that's one of the basic ideas of what social enterprise is about. The other thing that social enterprise does, of course, is it's not necessarily about generating money for service delivery. It can be about actually giving people a chance or an opportunity, giving them the skills that they need to get work, people who don't or are otherwise unable to get those skills. Or it's about making food available for people who can't afford their own food or don't have access to quality food. It can be about giving people things as much as just generating money. So what is social enterprise? I guess because it can be all those different things that necessarily business can be, when you start to look at the literature and do a bit of research into social enterprise, you'll see a myriad of different definitions about what social enterprise is. And it seems to me that it probably means something different to each individual person who decides they want to get involved in it, because they get involved in it for a particular personal reason. To me, it's just about that doing business for doing good. So whatever your outcome is, it's about a positive outcome for people who are less fortunate than perhaps you are, or it's about an improvement to our environment or the world in which we live. But essentially, it's that somewhere in the middle where business meets purpose, and it's really using business for purpose. There's been a real growth in Australia in particular in perhaps the last 5 to 10 years in talking about social enterprise, and you'll see much more even in mainstream media about social enterprise. There's and if you have a look at the conversation, they've been running quite a number of articles around social enterprise. And one of the reasons behind it, I think, is that reduction in the government funds that are available. So you find a lot of established charities and not-for-profit organisations are looking for alternative ways to source funding. There's some really innovative things happening around intellectual property. For example, aged care providers who've developed specific software around their service delivery, actually setting up a company that's a software company. And so they then sell their software on to other providers, and they use the money generated out of that to be able to improve the services that they deliver to their clients. I also think that it's far more powerful and far better for people to actually be able to give them some way to improve their lives themselves, which is why I think you see the explosion in things like coffee shops giving people with disabilities or people who can't otherwise get a job, giving them some sort of training. There's a lot of social enterprise driven out of microfinance in developing countries, because it actually helps people to create a better life for themselves rather than just giving them a handout and making donations, as perhaps was historically the way we used to do things. So you see this growth in academic study, and there's lots of organisations around who are starting to support social enterprise and social enterprise initiatives. But as was introduced to you, I'm a lawyer, so I'm here to talk to you about legal things. And really establishing a social enterprise is like establishing any other business. You've got to think about finance, how you're going to get the money to set this great idea of yours up. What are the services and what are the products that you're going to deliver? What are the regulatory compliance issues around those? And we heard Ronnie talk about some particular challenges around food delivery. How are you going to market this? How are you going to get your idea out there? How are you going to stand out from the crowd? How are you going to attract volunteers? Volunteers are a really good source of resources for for not-for-profits and charities in Australia, although I have seen that the latest statistics indicate that unfortunately our volunteering is dropping off. What sort of employees are you looking for? But really, getting the legal structure right actually underpins all that, because there's a lot of those things that you can go back and you can fix. Ronnie talked about how she fixed her recruitment process. But if you don't have the legal structure right at the beginning, it's one thing that's really hard to go back and fix. So that, I guess, is the thrust of my message for you today. Let's understand what structures are available to you. Let's help you try and get it right in the beginning. So what are your options? First of all, what I've sort of broken it down into is two possibilities, either an existing not-for-profit or charity that's looking to establish a social enterprise, or if you're wanting to set up a new entity. Now, of course, an existing not-for-profit can either keep the social enterprise, what I've called in-house, so keep it within their existing structure, or they can go out-house and set up a separate enterprise. But if you're someone here today who's looking to start a social enterprise for the first time, what I'm going to say to you about establishing a new entity will be relevant to you. In terms of if you're a not-for-profit organisation wanting to establish a social enterprise, it's really possible to do that regardless of what your existing legal structure is, so whether you're an incorporated association or a company limited by guarantee, because all you have to really do is establish a separate business unit within your existing business structure. It can have its own reporting lines. You can track it and record it separately. So it is possible to do it within your existing structure, although there's some reasons why you might want to separate it out. So if we talk about the in-house option to start with, really the main benefit of it is that it comes with minimal establishment costs. You're not setting up this new legal entity. You're not creating a whole different reporting regime around another company. You've probably got your existing frameworks there that you can utilise. And importantly, you don't have to worry about what you're going to do about the board, because your board just continues on trucking with your existing organisation, although you might want to think about whether you've got the right skill set on the board. And your surpluses simply become part of your general revenue that can be used for your main charitable purposes. And generally speaking, as long as you're doing that, you're not going to fall foul of any of your regulatory requirements around your charity status or your tax endorsements. Potential problems are that if you don't get it right and your social enterprise isn't closely enough linked to your charitable objectives, that you might actually create some problems for your charitable status. But there's also risks to your core business. You might find that people actually take their eye off the ball about that core service delivery that you're involved in. Or you might find that actually this enterprise is a little bit more risky, and so if you've got established resources, whether they're capital or financial, you might find that risks associated with your new enterprise can have an impact on your existing business. That brings us to the outhouse option, and I think if outhouses all had that lovely calmer feel about the half moon, we might not feel so disenchanted about having to use them when we're camping around in the bush. So the outhouse option is really where you set up a completely new legal structure to accommodate your social enterprise. The alternatives, and again, this is the same as if you were setting up a plumbing business. Your alternatives are you can be a sole trader, you can have a trust, you can have a company. Incorporated associations obviously not open to for-profit businesses. The other structure that's around is a cooperative. But really, my view is that today the only structure that you should be considering is the company structure. It's the most one that's generally recognised in the community and in business and finance as the most robust structure for an entity. Its funders and resource providers are familiar with it, and it doesn't come with all of the baggage of being under state-based legislation for incorporated associations. It's one of the biggest problems of our federation is that we still have this separation of laws to a large extent in relation to the states, and incorporated associations are stuck in that state-based regulatory framework, and the various offices of fair trading aren't the best regulators. So what are the requirements for a company? It's important to remember that if you want to set up a not-for-profit company, they generally are companies limited by guarantee, but they don't have to be. They can be Pty Ltd companies or private companies, and there's some reasons why you might want to do that. But as you can see, you actually don't need a lot of people to set up a company. You know, you can be quite agile and quite nimble, although you have to ask yourself whether, you know, 3 people would really give you enough people on the board to be able to support you and to have a strong enough governance framework. The real issue is around how money comes out of those companies. So let's say you are this aged care provider, the example that I gave you earlier, and you've got this software that you can really sell. How do you get money out of the new company that you set up as your tech company? How do you get money out of there back into your charity or your not-for-profit to be able to then use that money for service delivery? It's not so easy with a company limited by guarantee, because it can't distribute dividends the same as a proprietary limited company can to its shareholders. So a not-for-profit company can be a shareholder of a private company, and your private company can generate revenue and it can distribute the revenue to the not-for-profit by way of dividends, or it can make donations to your not-for-profit and offset that against its income. But if you do go down the company limited by guarantee route, there are ways that you can get money out. You can make loans to that company as the startup capital, which then obviously has to be repaid, or you can have service agreements, because your new entity needs all those back office services that you've got, needs your accounting and your HR. So you have a service agreement and you get money out that way. Or one of the objects of your new company can actually be to provide funds to the existing charity or foundation where you do all your good work. And so its objective is to generate money to put back into your core business. Issues for you to consider if you do set up a separate enterprise, and this applies equally to new social enterprises. Do you want to be registered as a charity with the ACNC and entitled to tax concessions? I mean, there's a lot of benefits with that, but it may not be what you want to do, and it may not necessarily be necessary. If you're setting up a coffee shop and the whole purpose of that coffee shop is to provide training for people to enable them to get the skills to get jobs, you just might be happy to plough any income that you do get straight back into that enterprise. It might not be important to you that you necessarily are registered or recognised as a charity. And you have to remember also that our tax system and and the way it fits together with charity regulation in Australia is incredibly complicated. And there's a whole raft of tax exemptions and concessions that you can be entitled to. You can self-assess for some, you have to be endorsed for others. You know, do you get GST exemption as well as income tax exemption? Can you use FBT concessions? It's, you know, they keep talking about simplifying it, and I don't see any sign of it happening soon. But it is a big consideration, and one that you really need to get your head around and make some decisions about where you want to take your enterprise. I think this, you know, who will be the board is a critical decision. And you heard Ronnie talk about the importance of getting the right people on the board. And particularly if you're in a startup phase and you're perhaps new at this yourself, you know, what sort of people do you need to have guiding you? You need some people who are really clued up in business. You need some people who really understand finance. You might aim to get a lawyer, someone who actually understands the regulation and how to work your way through that minefield. And you probably need someone as a mentor. I think mentors, whether it's your, you know, whatever sort of career you're engaged in, I think having a good mentor is critical. So if this new enterprise is a sort of a spin-off from an existing not-for-profit, some of the friction you can have is deciding who from your existing board is going to be on the board of this new enterprise. And you might find you have directors who see it as a bit of a sexy thing to be involved in, so they're putting their hand up, but they might not necessarily be the people who've actually got the skills that you need to guide that new enterprise. My feeling is that it's probably, in those circumstances, better to be a couple of representatives from your existing board, and then to recruit some people who have particular skills that are going to help you drive that social enterprise. And so it becomes a combination of existing board members and some new fresh faces. Again, how you resolve all of those particular issues depends on what you want this social enterprise to do. Is it simply going to be a cash cow that you're going to use to raise funds to direct back to existing service delivery? Is it trying to have some environmental impact? Is that all you're about? Or are you, creating job opportunities for people who can't get opportunities elsewhere? And really the mix of those two will determine exactly, how you want to structure it, whether you want to register as a charity, and the types of people that you're looking for in your organisation, and also where you're going to go to for funding, and obviously how much funding you need is going to have a really big impact on that. I thought I'd give you 2 case studies that I've been involved in working with that would give you a bit of a feel for the types of issues that come up in relation to establishing social enterprises. The first one, I found it really astounding when the CEO of this organisation contacted me, because I'd been working with him for quite a long time. Most of my work is in the aged care and retirement village sector, and we'd done a lot around issues in relation to aged care, and it took me quite by surprise when he told me that they'd actually set up a construction company and they were building their own facilities and they were going on to build facilities for other people. And the reason they did that was because they have particular building requirements, and they really couldn't get mainstream builders to get their head properly around the different configurations that you need to have in aged care, and they couldn't get any quality outcomes, and they couldn't get people to work quickly enough for them. So he got himself a really good builder, and they set up a building company. Well, they set up a building arm. In Queensland, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in most states of Australia, you have to actually have a builder's licence to be able to do this, surprise, surprise. And it requires you to have a certain amount of financial backing behind you. And the way that the licensors measure that is a ratio between your assets and your liabilities. And if you're an aged care provider with lots of bonds, or what are now refundable accommodation deposits sitting in your accounts, they're actually liabilities, because you've got to pay all that money back eventually when people leave. So there's no way in the world, despite the fact that they were quite successful, that they could get this ratio right to be able to get their builder's licence. So they came to see us about how do we go about solving this. And fortunately for them, they did have some significant cash reserves. So what we did, well, first of all, their constitution. And if I can give you a message today, another message today, your constitution, your constitution, your constitution. You will live and die by your objects and compliance with your constitution and fulfilling your not-for-profit charitable objectives. So we had, the first thing to do is look at their constitution, make sure it enabled them to actually do this. We had to make some amendments to that. And then what we did was on this occasion, set up a private company, because we had to have a way to get cash into this new enterprise. So new company issued shares to the value of the cash injection that we had to make, so that we could satisfy the building licensing regime that we had the cash sitting there. And that's what we did. I wasn't convinced about the CEO becoming the sole director of that company, so they had a sole director company. I don't think that was the way to go. I don't think the CEO should be on a board of any company that's being used to run a not-for-profit. That's a view I have. I think you need to maintain the distinction between governance and management. The second case study involves an organisation that's involved in looking after people who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. And one of the big issues that has traditionally been faced in that area is providing appropriate health care for people who are homeless. And it's an enormous impost on the hospital system in trying to get homeless people to the hospital, getting them to appointments, or getting them to stay at hospital long enough to be seen. So this organisation has come up with some particularly innovative strategies in collaboration with private hospitals about getting nurse practitioners out into the parks, under the bridges, to actually see homeless people where they are, and to try and take care of them in that way. And it's been incredibly successful. They want to take the next step and actually set up a health service from a physical address where people who are, again, at home, homeless or at risk, and particularly families, can actually go and get free or very, very low cost health care. There are some really good examples of this around the world, and probably the most well-known is St Mungo's in the UK. There's also a really good service in Melbourne, where it's a combination of looking after people who are at risk, but they also open their doors to people in the surrounding suburbs. So you tend to see them located in places equivalent in Brisbane of West End, South Brisbane, in Melbourne around Fitzroy. And any money or any income they derive from their paying patients is obviously used to offset the cost of service delivery to those who are at risk. But of course, setting up a health service comes with requirements for a fair bit of money up front. So the question, where do you get that money? There's been a number of different sources of revenue, but one of the biggest chunks of money has come through collaboration with a charitable foundation. So how do we go about setting up this, what sort of legal structure are we going to use for this new health service? Because of the relationship with the funder, it couldn't be within the existing organisation. My view is too that for risk management strategy, risk management reasons, it's better to have it outside the existing organisation in a separate entity, particularly if you're getting into healthcare. So we registered a new company limited by guarantee. The major donor and the not-for-profit organisation are the only members of this new company limited by guarantee. And we've got an agreement in place between them about who's going to be on the board, rotating chairs, how we're going to address when new capital is required, basically how we're going to work together as members, a bit like a shareholders agreement that you would have in a for-profit company. They've also got some really good collaboration agreements with the other private hospitals who are also providing clinical services and nurses nurse practitioners to deliver the care. And that was perfect timing as it happens. I understand that we're going to have questions in the panel section later, so look forward to talking to you then. Thank you.